Hey, Suze, how's it going?
Good. Hello. How are you?
I am wonderful. I'm super excited to talk about boundaries with you today.
I know. It's a big one.
It is a
It's a
big
good
one.
topic. Yeah.
We're so just to share with the audience exactly what we're talking about boundaries, it's regarding setting the guidelines for your own worth. And
hmm
we had some contemplation around like how we would even describe our conversation around boundaries. Whether it's, is it something that we speak? Is it something that we show? Is it, yeah, yeah,
Just an
there.
unspoken energy. That's what I'm excited to dive into is like how we all view boundaries and live them and act on them and what they mean. Cause like it can be a bit of a cloudy gray area for me sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. And I think that's why everyone voted for us to talk about boundaries because it is one of those
Totally.
things that can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Something that Susan and I were discussing before hitting record is how we are both in and around the start of our moon cycles, our periods. So
hmm
we're a little grumpy today.
Yeah, I'm in a really bad mood.
We're both in terrible moods, but we're going to give you as much love as possible, and as much love as possible to boundaries because they are really important. And it's actually kind of perfect that we're talking about them when we're not feeling our greatest.
Yes, exactly. I was just going to say it's kind of fitting because I don't know. And maybe it's even like energetically aligned that we're feeling this way as we're talking about boundaries because this is kind of how I feel when when I come into conflict with a boundary or, come
Mm.
head to head with a boundary that needs to be set. There's just this like heavy, low, like, well, there's various feelings. It depends on what the boundary is and what happens. Um, but
Mm.
it's kind of this low, heavy energy I find.
Mm. Yeah. Has that happened to you recently? Like where you feel like your boundaries have been crossed and you're kind of like, it's not feeling the greatest.
Yeah, well, I'd say like the biggest practice for me as of late has just been, like we've talked about it, doing like you've done your masculine cleanse, and I'm doing my own cleanse right now, or I'm on my own like dating hiatus. And there's a lot of boundaries around that for myself that I chose to honor. And on one hand, there's a lot of satisfaction and peace and fulfillment in me honoring those boundaries and being like, and respecting them, It's like I'm doing this for myself and I'm meeting myself where I need to be. And um, so there's no desire for me to tempt that or mess it up. And like, that's a beautiful feeling. It's like I have my back.
Mhm.
But there's moments or certain situations or interactions where I'm like, this isn't necessarily on par with where my headspace is supposed to be.
Mm.
If I meet someone and there's an energy there that is maybe like potentially gonna violate that cleanse or that space I'm taking for myself, I have to lay down the law. um, Even if it's for myself in my own head.
Totally.
Like I opened Tinder the other day. Actually, this is a great example. I opened Tinder the other day just because I was like, am I for sure invisible? Like,
Mhm.
did I for sure hide this? Because I had a friend reach out to me that she saw me on there. Um,
Okay.
and I was like, oh, I thought I was hidden, and I kind of forgot about it. And then literally a few days ago, I was like, I should check if I'm actually hidden. So I opened it, and I wasn't hidden actually, so it was a good thing I did. So I went invisible, and I just had like a few remnant matches from when I was on there before that I think I had closed off already, but I just unmatched. um And there was a feeling in that too, where I was like, oh shoot, like what if I want to come back to any of these people one day?
Mhm,
But it obviously already didn't manifest into anything, you know?
mhm.
And I also matched with this guy previously who I think I had just been like, hey, how's it going? And he was like, he like sent me a compliment, and then I said something in return, and then he just like he fell off, right? And I saw looking at the thread that he wrote me like 3 more times, like every month. Like he'd be like, hey, how was your Halloween? And then again, like in November, was just like, hey, how's it? And you know, I felt really bad. Like I felt like I had to let him know that I wasn't ignoring him and that I was off the app. And this is kind of like a very small case of boundaries
Mm.
where I'm like, am I immediately about to engage? And I'm like on Tinder. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Um, what I did was I did just send him a quick thing. I was like, I'm not even on the app. Like, sorry about that. Didn't see your messages. Wish you well. And I just unmatched and closed the app. So I kind of did it, but at the same time, I didn't owe him any explanation, I don't
Mm.
think. So, you know, like situations where you kind of, there's this gray area where you're like, do I set this boundary? Do I not? And it comes up a lot when you're like a people pleasing person, when you're an empath, which like you and I
Mm.
both talk about or are. You worry about other people's feelings. Like it's hard to set a boundary, you know?
Yeah, I feel like there's so much in that. For those of you who don't know what a masculine cleanse is, it's basically like Kendra Kunov calls it like the no man diet, like she's termed it that, but it's basically not engaging with the opposite sex, assuming you're attracted to them in like any physical way, any validation seeking, emotionally, all of that.
Mhm.
um yeah, okay, so maybe we take a few steps back with the whole
Yeah, there
boundaries
was a lot
cover.
there. There was a lot
I know I
there.
asked that question, but it makes sense, right? It's not always black and white when it comes to boundaries and what is the
Mhm.
right way to approach them. And I love that. I love that example. And actually, I can like, let's address that really quickly. But I think it's feeling into, does this feel like a violation of my personal boundaries, and feeling that within yourself, right?
Mhm.
So if
Yeah.
it's like, this feels yucky in some way, I'm about to respond to him, or like I'm trying to hook him, or, get some kind of a hit out of it, then maybe that's not really honoring my boundaries. But if it's a courtesy, hey, like, I'm not an asshole, like I don't ignore people's messages, I just haven't been on this app. I don't To me, that doesn't feel like crossing a boundary, but I think it's
Yeah.
checking in with yourself, and then also going to a friend and present them with the situation and say, can you help me navigate if this is a boundary that am I
Right.
crossing a boundary?
Look for like accountability. Yeah.
Yeah, like, or like a mirroring of intuition or something like
Mhm.
that from
Oh, I
people
like
you
that.
trust.
I love that way of describing it. A mirroring of intuition.
Yeah, yeah.
Ooh. I like
So John Weiland will call it like your oracle. Like, women are so naturally intuitive, so it's like
yeah.
call on one of your oracle sisters and have them be the oracle for you, and like reflect back what they're
Mhm.
getting intuitively from the situation.
The biggest way I've used that is with not contacting exes. Like
What do you mean?
just like not like if I've been tempted to
Mm,
contact or respond in a situation where I know I shouldn't, or I've laid that boundary for myself, like, you know, that it's not somewhere I want to go. Um, just I've reached out to like close friends to kind of, I'll even say, you know, like I'm tempted to do this right now. Can you just like talk some sense into me?
mhm.
And I think I've even reached out to you for that purpose too. And like they'll always kind of find the right thing to say that echoes back to a value I set early on or something I stated to them that they're just like here to remind me of. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, not going to do it,
Mm,
you know?
totally. Yeah, I love that. So describing a boundary, yeah, like how would you describe a boundary?
I literally do see it as like a protective mechanism, protecting your self, your worth, your energy, your time. Like that's why I think it crosses into so many areas of our life, so many situations, because it can be about giving people too much time, saying yes to everything. It can be about, violating values we have, like betraying values we have. That's one of the hardest situations I find is like if I've set a term or a value for myself and I've allowed someone to overstep that, then not only do I feel offended and hurt by the situation, but I feel betrayed by my own self.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's like whether it's something you just know and set internally, or something you have to, I don't know, act on or speak to somebody. Like that's where it gets tough as well, is like asserting yourself and making that boundary known. Um, again, for someone who's really empathic, sensitive, people pleasing, who avoids conflict, it can be really hard to do. You'll almost like, I've spent a lot of my life just allowing everything and suffering the consequences because I don't want to
mm,
hurt somebody but like I've come such a long way since then with everything I've been through. Like now it's been almost this enjoyable, at times it's not, but it's an empowering is a better word, practice to state a boundary of mine and respect it and ask somebody else to. And like that feels amazing. That feels so good. Like it's a new experience for me.
yeah, yeah, it really helps you build your own trust in yourself, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah, I always think of boundaries also as showing others and yourself ultimately how you deserve to be treated.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I feel like that's the clearest way to describe it for me, whether you show them through your actions and the way you respond when a boundary is crossed, whether it's communicating to them, these are my needs and these are the consequences if you don't respect my boundaries, whether it's being very clear with yourself, what you will allow in your life, what you won't. And it
Mm-hmm.
ultimately comes down to what are your needs? Um, what will help you feel safe, loved, safe and
Yeah.
loved, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
maybe held in some way, right? Depending on what it is. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're like this, but I have definitely a rebellious streak to me. So I think initially when I was learning about boundaries, I was like that feels like a rule. I don't like rules. I don't like
Mhm.
being so, and I also don't like being so firm with things because what if I change my mind and I want to play in a certain area or whatever? But I think in doing that, I also was not being responsible for myself, for the experiences I was having, because I was just so loose with it. And then I would allow people in who wouldn't honor my boundaries, but I would justify it. I'd be like, oh, it's
Right.
okay, that, I don't know, he doesn't call me when I need him to, or doesn't respond to me when I need him to, or whatever it might be,
Right.
because this is just going to be short term anyways. Like
Mhm.
it's not going to be a long term relationship, or whatever ways I would justify it, right? Or it's just a
Yeah.
fling, or and I would come out of it not feeling great and almost having convinced myself that it was worth breaking those boundaries. Or I really love what you said too about okay, maybe they crossed my boundaries, but I don't want to have that conversation.
Mhm.
So I just need to get over it and move on. Or I wouldn't communicate how my boundaries were crossed. And then I would just end up cutting people off
Yeah,
because that,
exactly.
that
And then they
felt
have no
easier.
idea.
And they have no idea because that felt easier
Yeah.
than having a conversation around it.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah. That's so hitting on so many levels. I could so relate. Yeah.
I find that I've really been practicing having the difficult conversations with people and speaking about my boundaries or speaking about when I feel maybe hurt in some way or whatever it is, usually knowing that it happened because I didn't communicate my boundaries or I
Hmm.
didn't communicate my needs. Most of the time, that's actually what's at play. And then I get
Right.
upset at the other person that they didn't honor my needs or my boundaries, but I never told them what they were.
Oh, that is such a thing. And it's so good to be aware of that, like to have that self-awareness, because I think we've all come into that kind of experience. And yeah, that's absolutely a thing. It's just like making sure that we do communicate those things. And like I said, it to me, it just depends so much on the situation. It's like if I'm entering a relationship with somebody, it's important to, I don't know, it's become more and more important for me to set my intentions of what I'm actually looking for and open to and like what I'm not looking for. Um, because then that just eliminates so much room for error and confusion right away. And
Mm,
then just in ongoing long-term relationships, like when I've been in relationships, communicating what my needs and expectations are like beforehand,
mm,
with just day-to-day things is totally important so that when that boundary is crossed, you know that you've like mentioned it and set it out, you know. But it can be hard. Like I love what you were saying about how it's also like knowing, it's setting, it's putting out there how you want to be treated, how you deserve to be treated. Um, and it's like crucial to, I think, almost as a first step, maybe outline what it is that you do want, like what makes you feel safe and held, like you were saying, and loved. Um, and then from there, you can more easily identify what you don't want and what's not hitting that. And when
mm,
somebody is violating that. So for example, if I was dating somebody, you know, maybe for me, a thing is like consistent communication. If they drop off for like several days on end, which I've had in like past relationships, um, that's not something I'm going to stand for again, you know?
totally.
And like in the past, I was just like, I got an explanation and I was like, okay, like they were just going through something, or like, you know how it is. Like you think of a million reasons why that person's AWOL, you know?
Hmm.
And when you're dating, or at least when I'm dating, like that's a flag to me, like to disappear for days on end and then just like come out of nowhere and be like, oh yeah, I was just busy, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and I think now and in the future, I would be like, look, I'm not going to stand for that, you know, and that person's either not going to be a fit, or if it was I don't really know what explanation would be sufficient for a situation like that, honestly.
Well, I think so. So with boundaries, I think there's a few things to kind of to help navigate it, right? So if you're and this doesn't matter, like boundaries aren't just with your partner or someone you're dating, right? Of course, like we know
Mhm.
it's with our parents, it's with our friends, it's with our families, our neighbors, like we have boundaries and can have boundaries with everybody. So I think the first thing is asking yourself if someone has crossed your boundaries, were they aware of these boundaries,
Right.
right? Like that's kind of the first question, because I would think, say someone does go MIA for 5 days or something like that, and you have a decision at that point. You can be like, well, I'm just going to write them off because they crossed my boundary when it comes to communication. Um, or, you know, I'll give them an opportunity to explain, but it's almost like because we're hurt, we assume that they should have known better. And
Mhm.
people don't know necessarily what your boundaries are, right? What might
Yeah.
bother you may not bother someone else, may not
Well,
be a need.
someone might want that kind of space. Like I might
Exactly.
even want that kind of space. Like that's something I have to think about. It'll I guess it would depend on the relationship and who it is and what the nature of it is, you know?
Totally, totally. So it's like, okay, so say the boundary was crossed, asking yourself, were they aware? If you're not sure, ask them, right? Like eventually you're going to have an opportunity to communicate with this person if your boundaries have been crossed. Like we're assuming that. So it's like, okay, so this happened. I want you to know that one of my needs are XYZ, that we communicate or that I hear from you every couple of days. This is how it can look if you need some ideas. How does that feel to you?
Mhm.
Can you honor this need of mine? And give them the opportunity. Then they can say yes or no.
So here's the thing that I worry about, okay? And I think it's like an irrational worry, but do you ever have the thought that when you set out a boundary for someone, they're going to meet it in an ingenuine way? Like they're going to perform it, but it's not genuine. So they're either going to like fall apart and fail at it or resent you for it or something. Do you know what I mean? It's almost a way that I try to sabotage myself from speaking that boundary where I'm just like, you know, and like I think it's such a common thing we struggle with as women, especially where we're just like, no, I'm gonna be cool. I'm just gonna be cool with it, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, but there is this like feeling I get sometimes where I'm like, if I state explicitly what I want and need, is this person just gonna be performing it for me, but it's not who they are?
Yeah, that is a great way to sabotage yourself. Because ultimately, yeah, well, that just comes down to trust, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can, I think someone who doesn't want to honor a boundary will eventually stop honoring that boundary. Like it's really hard
Yeah.
to pretend and like pull it off consistently for a
Yeah.
very long time. Eventually
Yeah.
it'll come to the surface. Um, so going into that and trusting, you know, like I've communicated it. They said that they can do it. Their integrity seems solid. They're
Mm-hmm.
honoring my boundaries, all of my boundaries. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like, well, they honor this boundary, but they don't honor this one. It's like every boundary is just as important because we
Yeah.
tend to do that too, right? Well, they didn't cheat on me, but you know, like they're spending more money than they had promised me they would in our
Mm-hmm.
financial situation. So it's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not cheating on me. They're not crossing this boundary, but yet they're crossing this one. So it's
Exactly.
almost, you know, sometimes there can be these like interesting ways of prioritizing our boundaries as
Yeah.
well. Um, but I feel like it's ultimately if you don't trust that somebody can honor your boundaries, then maybe that
There,
can that can be an
there's
intuitive.
something bigger
There's
going
something
on.
bigger. Either they're not trustworthy,
Yeah.
or you have some things to work through.
Yeah. And I think that that just speaks to a lot of the healing I'm still working on and need to do because I've had people in the past who, you know, have felt that way to me where they just play a role for me and it's not the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very paranoid way to go into things with it's not a reason not to express your boundaries. Like I think it's very important because no matter what you want to set out the kind of respect that you know that you feel you deserve and expect from somebody,
Totally.
and it will eventually show their true colors, you know.
Yeah. So something that I would think about that I could like relate to that on is not telling people what I need or what I want or what I like. Like I used to do that a lot because I'm like, well, then they're going to do it because I said that I like that or I want that, not because
That's what
they
I mean.
want to. I
Yes.
want them to. And it's like, that's so unfair for them because It's the other way around too. Like if you don't know that your partner really prefers cream over almond milk in their coffee, but you
Mhm.
just keep making it with almond milk and they hate it and they're like, "You know what? If they really knew me, they would make my coffee right." Or if they really cared
Yeah.
about me, they would ask, "Do you prefer, what
Yeah.
do you like more?" Right? Like we can make, that's like just a small silly example, but
Oh, but it's so things like that happen in relationships all the time. And it grows into this massive thing. Like 10 years later, they're like, you put the wrong coffee or wrong milk in my coffee for the last 10
Yeah, exactly.
years.
Exactly. So I love that you bring that up because yeah, it's almost like this idea, it's almost like this fairy tale of they're just going to know me so well that they're just going to know exactly how to touch
Yeah.
me, exactly what to gift me. They'll know my love languages. We'll have the exact same love languages. They will, know where my favorite restaurants are, know my favorite meals, da da da. And it's like, holy shit, we're all so different.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
even like our intimate partner, like there's so many situations where we're in a relationship and intimately, like sexually, we have not communicated what we like and don't like to our partner, and we just deal with it for a long time. Like
yeah.
that is such a common issue in relationships in bed, um because we're afraid even in that kind of situation to be like, I don't like it like that, you know? Like that's hard to do. But
For
it's
sure.
crucial.
Totally. Totally. And yeah, since we're talking about the sexual matters, it's a common thing that, and not everybody is like this, but say that like the masculine partner may come forward, or one of the people out of the partnership might come forward and say, I have this fantasy and I think it's really hot. Sometimes it might involve another person and they bring it to their partner and their partner freaks the fuck out.
Hmm.
They're like, do you know that he wants to have a threesome? And it's like, am I not good enough? Am I da da da? And it's like, and then you make it about yourself in some way.
Hmm.
But everyone has a right to their own needs, their own fantasies, their own like yearning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet we take it personally. And it's the same thing when you're on the receiving end of a boundary,
Mm,
because that can be tough too. Like that's been triggering for me at times
for
when
sure.
someone's like, no, no, I don't know, I don't hike on Sundays, or like, no, I don't do voice notes, or
Yeah.
no. And I'm like, what the fuck? Well,
Yeah.
maybe I don't text, or maybe I only hike on Sundays. And it's like, obviously you don't care to hang out with me. Obviously you think my voice is annoying. Like I could make the whole thing about me.
Hmm.
And that's another really powerful reminder is the boundaries have everything to do with you and taking care of yourself, as it does the other person and their needs and their boundaries as well.
Absolutely. Oh my God. And I've been there too. Like I'm trying to think of an example. Like a great example is in situations like with conflict. If I have had like a friend or family member who's upset with me, the thing that I'm used to growing up is like you battle it out right here and now. Like
Mm,
you fight it out till it ends, till there's some kind of conclusion. Um, but I've had in certain past situations, like whether it's a partner or a friend, express a desire to have space and time. So like there'll be a conflict, they'll be like I need space for a couple days or a week, and I freak out.
yeah.
Like that is so hard for me because the way that I've grown up in conflict is like if they're not talking to me and they're taking space from me, like it's a huge deal. It's over. They're over it. They're over me. The friendship's over, the relationship's over, whatever. Whereas like
Mm,
I've done it in the reverse. Like I've taken space. Um, and it was something that took a few like consecutive situations for me to really drill into my being that this is just what they need to
Mm.
get through this situation. This is how they approach conflict. It's probably a healthier way than I was taught. I'd rather adhere to this way, frankly. And when we come back together to discuss the situation, we'll get through it and we'll be fine, you know? And those couple days or hours or however long period of a time it is that like I'm idle because they're taking space, um, is like it's been such a beneficial, important practice for me to work on that like impatience anxiety. Cause like you get this anxiety where you're like, oh my gosh, like what can I do to bring this person back in my court, you know? Um,
Mm.
and you have to fight that and just be like, I'm just going to chill and breathe and trust the foundation that we have, you know, and obviously it refers to like meaningful relationships that you don't want to end.
Right.
um, but yeah, like it's, and yeah, little things too. Like I've had friends who don't want to communicate after a certain hour of the day, um, or just have different needs. Like they're not on social media, where if it's not in line with myself and how I do things, it does take a second for me to be like, this is them and this is me. And we have two different, you know, ways of going about life. And it improves our relationship in the end because I know how to
Yes.
best approach and optimize that friendship or relationship or partnership or whatever. um like I know to communicate with that friend more so during like the morning hours, and I just get used to it and I'm thankful for it, you know. One of my best friends and I had a conversation like a few times, maybe every couple years. We kind of check in just naturally about like, how do you want to spend time together? Like what kind of activities are
Mm.
important to you? And that's especially
Mhm.
as like we hit different life milestones and things change, it can alter. And instead of feeling like you're falling out of alignment, you can be like, okay, my friend does love a lot of outdoor nature time, so I'm going to gear more of our free
Mm.
time to that. And then they know that I might want to go out like dancing, let's say, so they'll, you know, get the energy up to do a night of dancing like once every couple months for me.
I love that. I feel like it's so when if you look at boundaries of someone just showing someone showing you and you showing someone else, what will help you feel good and feel loved and feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
then communicating those needs, being respectful of the other person's needs, so it will create such a beautiful, loving, and safe dynamic
Totally.
between the two of you, right?
Yeah.
So even though a boundary can be so triggering, and you're like, well, in my life, when I grew up, if someone took space, that usually didn't end well. Like what, like
Mm-hmm.
the example you were given, right? Like you just hash everything out up front. Like if someone goes MIA, like they're a flight risk, you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
you freak out and you're like, I'm going to go knock on their door. Like, why aren't you answering my texts? Or
Mm-hmm.
you're going to bombard them with messages or send them funny memes. Like you're like anything to get a response.
Yeah.
Um, and meanwhile, all you're doing is making them feel less and less safe.
Exactly. You're making it worse.
You're making it worse. But I think that most people voted for the boundaries topic, most likely for their own boundary setting and
Yeah.
the challenge around that. And I think there's an aspect of, yeah, feeling guilty over having certain needs and boundaries and the fears around, if I set these boundaries, that I will lose people
Mm-hmm.
or that I will
Absolutely.
upset people, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that can happen. But then the question comes down to, do you want or need people in your life that can't honor you and give you what you need to feel loved and safe?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I know that I'm sure people are listening being like, yeah, that's easy to say until it's your mother or your father or your uncle or cousin or sister or brother,
Yeah.
or even your neighbor who you're stuck with, you know. I actually had a really intense experience where I set boundaries with my neighbor and she lost it, right? Like it was
Oh,
a
wow.
really horrible situation. And her response was she was extreme because she wasn't used to someone setting boundaries. And in my heart, like I'm also intuitive, like I know that she felt dropped and she felt scared and she didn't know how to navigate that. She probably didn't
Mhm.
even have healthy boundaries set around her as a kid either. So, um, but when it's like your mother or your father, I still tell my clients the same thing. And I'm the same way with my parents. It's if they treat you a way that doesn't feel good, or if they behave a certain way around you that makes you feel unsafe or unloved or massively triggered, then set a boundary.
Yeah.
And it's also really important that when you set the boundary, that if it is crossed, that there is a repercussion of some sort. It's not to punish them, not to hurt anyone, but it's to respect yourself and to protect yourself depending on the situation, right? So, especially now with the political environment that's happening,
Mhm.
you can have a boundary where you're like at a family gathering, like I do not talk about politics. That is not something that I'm comfortable with, you know, because it's like personally, I don't talk politics. And it's very triggering for me when people do because they get very heated and it turns into this like attacking situation,
Mhm.
or it can, and that feels unsafe for me. So my communications are, you know, if you speak about this, then I'm going to leave the room, or I'm not going to
Exactly.
be a part of this, or
Yeah.
and sometimes like it's ideal when you can speak it very clearly and say that. Sometimes people still won't hear your words. Sometimes it requires showing your actions. Sometimes you
Mhm.
can even say it in a lighthearted way. It doesn't have to be like definitely don't come at it with anger, because they're
Yeah.
not even going to hear anything that you're saying. Like, I don't talk about politics because they're fucking stupid and this is all bullshit
Mm.
anyway. You know, like that's might be how you feel on the inside, but then they're not going to hear your boundary. They're going to hear you getting heated and just respond with more
Exactly.
anger, right?
It's funny because we had that in my family. I had people in my family who set that kind of boundary where they're like, no politics, no discussions about politics at the table, because we had such contrasting views within our own family, and it would lead
Mm,
to we couldn't talk about it civilly. Like it would lead
mhm,
to a lot of arguing and yelling, and when there were small kids around, that became even more of a conscious thing. Um, and it took so much repetition, like so much repetition to drill it in and action to back it up, like exactly that, like having to leave the table, leave the situation, until people get used to it. And I think it's
mm,
so crucial with a family member. Like that's probably our greatest challenge and lesson with it, because you know we have love for our parents regardless of whatever may be going on and what our dynamic might be. Um and like, if you have a parent that is consistently violating a boundary of yours, it's it's important to let them know, as uncomfortable as it is. And my parents can be tough with that kind of thing. They're a pretty critical, like there have been times in my life where I've had to say, like, look, I I understand that the way like you show love is to point out the things that I need to improve on, like whether it's in my house
mm,
or my appearance or like anything. Um, but it doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't help, you know?
mm,
And the feedback is kind of like, well, and I've encountered this with different people as well, where the feedback is kind of like, well, now I don't have the